Hello and welcome to this series, Leaders I Love. And today I have with me Kaila Colbin, who I met, I think it was almost a year ago now, and I'll tell you about how we met. She is co-founder of BOMA Global and the CEO of BOMA New Zealand, which, if you don't know or aren't familiar with it, is an organisation that supports business leaders, government, educators, entrepreneurs, young people, change makers to navigate our rapidly changing world. And don't we have such a rapidly changing world right now, so that we can be more intentional and intelligent about the future we're creating. And again, you know, that sentiment, that statement there is so relevant and so pertinent right now. So I'm sure, Kaila, you are feeling that resonance and feeling that relevance with the work that you're doing at BOMA.
Yeah, I absolutely am. You know, when the pandemic first started emerging, there was a side to the narrative that is, you know, my job is to physically convene people, because most of what we've done historically is, you know, gatherings. We run training programs, we run large scale events, and obviously, if my job is to physically convene people and it's just become literally illegal for me to do that, you know, that puts us in a pretty awkward position, as you can imagine. But the other side of the narrative, as you've just described, is that my job is not at all to physically convene people. It's to help people navigate disruption and think differently about the world we have and the world we want and who we are and who we want to be. And seen through that lens, my job is as relevant as it has ever been, if not more so. So it's been a really interesting time and really forced me to come back to purpose for the organization and purpose for what we do. And, you know, how we give effect to that has transformed dramatically, but the underlying impetus hasn't changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about, you know, the organization spanning the world and the worldliness of it. And you, of course, are incredibly well-traveled yourself. You're from New York, I think, is that right?
I am born and bred in New York City, but I've been in New Zealand 15 plus years, and I am a citizen here, and this is definitely my Tūranga Waiwai.
Amazing. And you're based in Christchurch. I read you've also curated TEDx Got Base in Antarctica, worked with Gore and Brene Brown. So pretty amazing, not so much credentials, but just amazing experiences that you've had. And of course, I met you when you trained me in Brene Brown's Dare to Lead curriculum, which was last year in Christchurch. And that's why I've asked you to come and speak with me today. This series is not so much about all of the what that we're doing in COVID, though I do want to ask you to share some of the things you've been doing, because I think it's so relevant, the courage side of things, so relevant for us at the moment. It's also about getting to the heart of the leaders like you who are showing up with such strength, such stability, providing others a sense of stability and trust within themselves, and in that way providing hope. So thank you so much for being here to talk with me today.
My pleasure.
Now, you were one of the first people I saw, actually, in response to New Zealand's move to level 4. The first to host a digital summit to connect and to fortify your community. So I know that you were doing that as a gift to your community, and that was your Dare to Lead alumni, obviously, of which I am one. And so I saw that invitation, and I guess in a way it was a call to courage amongst all of us to show up, to refresh ourselves on that Dare to Lead curriculum and to connect together to, as I say, fortify ourselves as a community. The session was on courage in crisis. And so I wonder, without obviously going into the whole session, which I know was a 90-minute fantastic session, could you just share briefly the 4 skill sets of courage?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, our starting point for everything we do, whether it is during a crisis or not, is always how can we serve? What would be useful? How can we serve? And then the next question is, and can we serve in that way sustainably? So our starting point is not, you know, what can we make money at? How can we be useful at a particular time? And of course, when the pandemic emerged, you know, how can we be useful? The way that we can be useful is to help people start to sense make about what is happening and how we can approach it in a way that is constructive and in a way that sort of grounds us, because when everything is turned completely inside out, one of the things that happens is we lose our footing. We just don't know which way is up. We don't know what to connect to. And so, we did a few things very early on. And one of them, as you say, was that session on courage in a time of crisis, which we are still running, although we now call it Courage in Challenging Times. And where we came back to with that session is that, our single best measure of courage, our single most accurate measure of courage is our willingness to lean into vulnerability. And the definition of vulnerability is risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And so when we look at the situation we find ourselves in now, globally, we are facing risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure in a way that we have never experienced previously. And so I don't know if you can hear that door there, the children peeking their heads in, one of the beautiful things about doing Zoom interviews. So bringing us back to that understanding that our willingness to lean into that will define the courage with which we face this challenging time. The other thing that has come out of the training that I did with Brene Brown and the work that I've done before and since is, again, as you say, that understanding of courage not as something that people either have or they don't, but as a collection of skill sets that can be taught, that can be observed, that can be measured, and to which we can hold ourselves and each other to account for. And so that collection of skill sets is, the first one is the willingness to lean into vulnerability. The second one is our ability to live true to our values. The third one is our ability to trust and be trustworthy and to understand the components that make that up. And then the fourth one is our ability to rise up again when it all goes terribly wrong. When you show up for the courageous conversation and you lean in and you lean into risk and uncertainty and you're, emotionally exposed and it goes terribly and the person still hates you and you've gone flat on your face, are you going to pick yourself up and get back in and try that again? So those four skill sets together are all very, far from being kind of ephemeral, abstract, soft skills. They're very specific, we've got very tangible ways of looking at them. And they absolutely become stronger with practice. So, yeah.
That's such a good point, that it is a practice. It's not something to, like I did, came down to Christchurch and sat with you and many others across 2 days to go through the Dare to Lead curriculum taught by you under Brene Brown. You don't just do that for 2 days and then, you know it and you enact it. I mean, of course, there's part of that, but as you say, it is such a practice. And that practice, I think, starts with continuing to remind ourselves and refresh ourselves of those four skill sets. And even just one at a time, just focusing on one of those things at a time can be really powerful, I think, especially when so much is going on around us. To focus, zero in and focus with simplicity, I think, is quite key. And Brene Brown and others I've noticed through these last few weeks have been turning to acronyms to help people to remember some of the frameworks and some of the practices that are being shared throughout this time. And I wanted to dive into one of the skill sets being trust, because the Gallup organisation just recently released or re-released some research that they have been doing across the last decade, I think, into what followers look for in leaders, particularly in a time of crisis. And those are four things. They are stability, compassion, hope, and trust. And so I thought perhaps we could talk a little bit about trust, because it's quite an intangible, felt experience. You know if you trust someone or if you don't. You just have an intuitive sense if you trust the context or the situation or if you don't. Yet it is built up by very specific actions and practices. And Brene Brown has an acronym for trust. And so I wondered if you could again just briefly talk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is, you made the comment that you don't just sit through a program like this for 2 days and then you've got it and you're done. I can tell you, you don't even teach this stuff for a year to over 700 people and then feel like you've got it and you're done. We are always all on the journey, right? Always all on the journey. And you know, the one of the greatest privileges of being able to do this work, to facilitate this work, is the opportunity to have the practice of it so at the forefront for me on a consistent basis, because, you know, every day I'm reminded, oh, wow, there it's showing up again. Here's another opportunity for me to do better at this. Here's another opportunity for me to learn.
Yeah.
So, you know, it is less of a destination and more of a lifelong commitment. It's kind of one of the ways I've been thinking about it is that, you know, doing the training that you did gets you your black belt, which is in martial arts traditions, your black belt qualifies you as a beginner. It's the beginning of your lifelong journey, not the end of it. Yeah. So coming back to trust, you know, as you say, we have this, we believe that sense to be intuitive, and yet that sense is formed from the aggregation of actions, right? We trust someone because they have displayed actions, and we might not have been explicit about noticing those specific actions and tying them to the level of trust we feel in someone at any given time. But absolutely, that level of trust will be the result of the actions displayed by the people around us. One of the things we talk about on the program is that vulnerability doesn't come before trust, but neither does trust come before vulnerability. They work together in a slow kind of stacking and layering process, that I'm a little bit vulnerable with you. You respond in a way that has made it safe for me to be vulnerable in that way. So I'm able to be a little bit more vulnerable with you. You respond, you know, in a good way. And so we can grow from there. Mm-hmm. So the acronym that we refer to when we talk about trust is BRAVING. And, you know, this is stuff that we spend like a half day on in the program. So basically what BRAVING is, it's the 7 elements of trust, and the B is about boundaries. And when we talk about boundaries, what we're talking about is, I need to be able to trust you to look after yourself. I need to be able to trust you to establish what's okay and what's not okay for yourself, because otherwise, I will, you know, I might do something that you might end up exploding at me because I've crossed your boundaries and I was totally unaware of it, right? One of the things that I always say when I'm teaching boundaries is that there is no way for me to trust your yes if I cannot also trust that you will say no when no needs to be said. So boundaries is about being very clear about what is okay and what's not okay, and not only establishing those boundaries, but upholding them, which is really the critical bit. Because if we establish them and then we say, okay, well, you've crossed the boundary, you know, but I'm just going to let you get away with it, then the boundaries aren't really helping us. The R is for reliability, which is about doing what we say we're going to do. The A is for accountability, which is about owning our mistakes and our actions. And those 3 go together really well. So you can imagine somebody saying, you know, hey, Tui, really sorry I didn't get that report to you on time. That is on me because I didn't set clear boundaries about the capacity that I had over the course of this week. I own that. Let me do what I can do to make it right. And so I was unreliable because I didn't set clear boundaries, and now I'm taking accountability for that. The V stands for vault, which probably a better word for it is confidentiality. It simply means we don't share information that isn't ours to share. The I is for integrity, which is choosing courage over comfort, choosing what is right over what is fun, fast, or easy, and choosing to live our values rather than simply profess them. The N is for non-judgment, and you can imagine if we're looking for a trusting relationship, if I'm sharing something with you and you're judging me for it, my trust in you is going to diminish considerably. And the G, very similar to the N, is for generosity. So again, you know, if I share something with you, if I'm late to a meeting, do you assume I'm late because I don't care and I'm lazy, or do you assume I'm late because something happened and, you know, being on time is not as important to me as it is to you, and therefore I don't realize the impact that it has on you. So are you assigning generosity to my intent and to my actions. And what we know, because of the methodology that Brene and her team use, which is this grounded theory methodology, is that everything anyone has ever told them about trust and what trust means to them fits into one of those 7 elements. And so what that allows us to do is get very specific when we're working with teams about, hey, this behavior was demonstrated a lack of reliability, and therefore we need to address that, as opposed to, I just don't feel like I can trust you, which is very difficult to work with because it's so intangible.
And that's really hard to hear if you hear someone say, I just don't trust you. But if you can break it down and pinpoint, there's one particular area or one particular action that I'm missing or looking for from you, I think it makes it so much easier to close that gap. It's really hard at the moment with all of us being at home and working remotely. And I think I'm really thinking in particular about the reliability and the boundaries, the R and the B, because reliability, doing what we say we will, we can have all good intentions, but working at home, especially for those of us who have become teacher as well as employee or boss or worker, the lines or the demarcation between work and home are so muddied, in fact, completely eroded. So we can have all good intentions of saying we'll do what we need to, and that can fall over. And of course, boundaries are tied up in that, the boundaries between work and home. And I think, a lot of leaders are recognising this and doing a very generous, and there's the G, generous job of recognising this. And some of the most amazing leaders that I've heard from in the last few weeks have said very categorically to their people that they don't expect full productivity, and that in fact what they do expect is for them to be less productive so that they can spend more time helping their families and children feel safe, which is very generous and fantastic. But I think the challenge is, and the resistance can come when people attach productivity to self-worth. And so I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the ways that I describe, if people ask me to sum up what the entire Dare to Lead program is about, for me, what it is about is dealing with what is actually going on. Dealing with what is actually going on. And so what might happen is, we have a situation, let's say I work for you, you say, hey, it's a tough time, you're going to have to be teaching as well as, bandaging bloody knees and, whatever. True story from yesterday. Looking after a chicken pox kid, true story from now. You might say, hey, all those things, and I expect lower productivity. That's okay. And I might say, thank you so much. That's really generous of you, but I'm pretty sure I can get this email done today, and I don't. And then I feel terrible about it. And then you say, no, it's fine. And I say, no, I should have. I'll get 5 times more things done today to make it up for you. And what is actually happening is I've got this thing going on where I've attached my own self-worth to productivity and to my level of productivity. And so what the Dare to Lead program does, it gives us language to be able to identify that and go, hey, I know I have a tendency to attach my self-worth to my level of productivity. I know there are people on my team who have that tendency. Let's talk about that. Let's just make it explicit. Let's just acknowledge that is a thing that happens, that it doesn't make you a bad person. You're not doing it wrong because you have that thing. And let's acknowledge that's a thing that we don't want to encourage, right? That we want to remind ourselves that our self-worth is not a function of our productivity, that our self-worth is intrinsic and constant, and that we are all valuable and valid human beings regardless of our productivity. And then in a work context, we may at different times have varying requirements for the kind of productivity we need, but at no point are those varying requirements or our ability to live up to those requirements or not an indicator of how worthy and valuable we are as human beings. So being able to explicitly, as soon as you name the dynamic, it starts to lose some of its power. Yeah. As soon as you say, this is what is, as soon as you say, hey, we're going in, let's say we're going into a difficult feedback conversation, and we're going in and, you're having to give me difficult feedback, and I'm coming in super defensive and feeling bad about it. And you start the conversation by saying, hey, can we just acknowledge this is a difficult conversation? It feels awkward. It's going to be challenging. It's, going to be, I'm sure it's going to be challenging for you. It might be challenging for me. Like, let's just understand, like, agree that that's the case. And can we also acknowledge that because it's going to be challenging, we might find it hard to be our best selves in this context. And so we'll have to work extra hard to be our best selves. And also, because it's going to be challenging, we might find ourselves getting to a point where we need to take a bit of a timeout so that we can recover and, regroup and circle back. And that's totally okay. Like, naming the dynamic means you don't go into the difficult conversation, everybody with their shoulders up to their ears, everybody with their hearts pounding, their mouths dry, and you go, so I need to talk to you about how come you're not delivering on that report, right? And then the other person's like, I couldn't do it because it's your fault. And then, everything turns to custard. So, it's just an incredibly valuable way to approach things that becomes much more productive rather than less, because we're tackling the root causes of what's happening.
I love that, and it's so simple. Name the dynamic. I, as part of this series, interviewed Rick Hansen, and he talks about it as name it to tame it. And it really does do that, doesn't it? You talking about, the shoulders up here and the heart racing. Of course, when we are in that kind of a bodily state, we're in our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight, flight, or freeze, which is not at all conducive to having, daring conversations, brave conversations, and all the rest of it. So I love that. Name the dynamic. And what that takes, of course, is an awareness. And that is an awareness of self, what's going on with yourself, and also an awareness of others, how they may be perceiving you. And so I'd love to talk just a little bit about awareness, because what I'm noticing over the last few weeks is, I think, greater and greater awareness individually of people's natural talents, abilities, what they are able to put out there into the world, to gift, to share, to serve. And as people are doing that, I feel that they are really connecting to their values and what's important to them. And I think when we, obviously it's part of Brene Brown's course, but even aside from the course, I think when we connect to our values and when we really live into our values, we do show up with so much more integrity, and it really does fortify and strengthen you. And so I'd love to ask you what your values are, or rather, which of your values you have connected to over these past few weeks to fortify yourself so that you can, as you have done, show up so steady and as such a trusted voice, and are offering so much content that provides so much hope to people.
Yeah. So as you'll recall, we do an exercise in the Dare to Lead program to articulate what our core values are. And we challenge people to narrow down to 2 values. We start with a page with 100 values on it, not 100 possible values, and lots of blank spaces if you want to add more. But we challenge people to narrow it down to 2. And the reason that we do that is because, there is a temptation when we're talking about values to include everything. I care about my family. I care about loyalty. I care about love. I care about nature. I care about the planet. I care about, reliability. I care about courage. I care about wholeheartedness. I care about all of the things, because they're all beautiful things, right? And what happens is when we include too many on our list, they stop becoming useful as a tool for decision making. Because this is what we want from our values. Our values should be useful when we are in a difficult moment. Can we bring the values out and go, okay, given that my 2 values are these, how should that inform how I'm going to respond to this moment? And so my 2 values that I come back to again and again and again are courage and integrity. They're a little bit snake eating its tail, because courage is kind of integrated as part of integrity. Integrity is choosing courage over comfort, choosing what is right over what is fun, fast, or easy, and choosing to live our values rather than simply profess them. But those are the values. The way that I think about it is I come back to a few questions. Like, number one, what are the values that give rise to any other values that I care about? So for example, my family is super, super important to me. Courage and integrity is how I want to show up for my family, with courage and integrity. My team is super important to me. If I can show up with courage and integrity to them, I'll be happy and feel like I'm doing a good job. So what are the values that give rise to your other values? What are the values that, we use the metaphor often of stepping into the arena, which is, when you're going into a difficult moment, what are the values that you would want to take into the arena with you? So if we're going to have a difficult conversation and I'm, my shoulders are up and my heart's beating and my mouth is dry and, I'm stepping into the arena with you, what can I come back to of going, okay, this is going to be really tough, but I just want to remind myself, if I behave with courage and integrity, I'll be being true to myself. What are the values? Can I use these to make difficult decisions? If someone comes to me and says, I really want to take time off next week, but they've taken heaps of time off before, but they have a pretty good excuse, but they take more time than everybody else. How can I bring these values into that decision-making process to ensure that I'm, fully living into them? For me, one of the core questions is, when it all turns to custard, when the business falls over or the marriage disintegrates, or you're on the front page of the paper, not in a good way, or, you've been on Twitter and there's been a huge internet backlash against you, when it all turns to custard, if I look in the mirror and I say to myself, I behaved according to these values, will I be able to live with myself? And so for me, those two values are courage and integrity, and that's how I try to show up.
That's so powerful. The mirror, well, it's not a metaphor, is it? The mirror practice. I think we could all do well to ask ourselves that question in the mirror every morning and every night. And in fact, the morning could be, how do I want to show up today? So you're actually setting your intention to show up in integrity to your values, whatever they may be. And then at night time, when you're washing your face, doing your teeth, whatever, how did I show up today? Was it with? So you're almost kind of doing that full circle. That could be a really nice practice for people to start. I think as far as the arena goes, I love that metaphor as well. And it's a big, wide arena out there at the moment. It's not to say that as we move in New Zealand from level 3 to level 2 and beyond, that it's all going to be hard. There's a whole lot of opportunity and possibility out there, but it's a whole new world, and it's a brave new world. And I do think that it is going to require daring leaders. So I'm so grateful to you for sharing a lot of the daring leadership principles with us today. I've just got one final question for you, which is that with our future being so wide open, what in your mind or in your view is the opportunity, or perhaps we might say the bridge between the current practicality and the future possibility? And what is your advice for people to walk across that bridge into the land of possibility and promise?
Yeah. So the first thing is, as we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, is to come back to purpose, is to go, your job is not to host events. Your job is to make people feel special and give them an amazing experience. Your job is not to serve people food at a restaurant. Your job is to nourish people and make them feel warm and loved. What is the core purpose behind what you do, and what might have to transform in order for you to give effect to that purpose? That's the first thing. The second thing is to be thinking about this current context in the same way that you and I were just speaking recently about the Dare to Lead program itself, that it is not a destination, that it is a lifetime practice. And so rather than thinking about this, and I know I noticed that you pulled that from my LinkedIn bio about the bridge between possibility and practicality, but rather than thinking about this environment as a bridge to some kind of destination, and one of the things that I've seen over and over is people talking about, oh, well, post-pandemic and when this is over, and there is not going to be a binary, okay, we can turn off the lights on the pandemic and now it's done and we can start something new. We're going to be coping with the ongoing this ongoing situation for a long time, even if we are, as we look likely to be, successful in eradicating coronavirus in New Zealand. And so if that's the case, what that calls upon us to do is start to get really comfortable with the uncertainty. And so one of the ways I think about it is the difference between skiing and surfing. Both of those things are super challenging sports. But with skiing, the mountain by and large stays put. With surfing, you have to be prepared for whatever form the wave takes, and every wave is going to be different. And so as leaders, cultivating that skill set of being comfortable with that level of uncertainty, as opposed to treating, so I'm like not a water baby at all. I don't like to swim. And so when I go out in the ocean, because I live on the beach, and so I go out into the ocean sometimes, and if a wave comes, I hold my breath and I duck underwater until the waves pass. That's every single time, right? And a lot of people are treating the pandemic that way. Like, we just have to hold our breath until it's passed. But we're going to be living in this state of heightened uncertainty for a long time. And so, we need to become better at understanding how to thrive in that context rather than simply ducking under and holding our breath until it's passed. And if we can figure that out, then I think we'll be able to come together in quite a special way to do something different. The final thing that I would say is something that I've been writing about and thinking about and really highlighting, is that this is an opportunity for us to apply the lens of the world as we wish it were to all of our decision making, to how we move forward from here, to look at our response to the pandemic through a lens of equity, whether that's equity for people living in poverty, whether that's equity for Māori, whether that's equity for people living with disabilities, to be able to look at some of the ways in which our societies and our economies were not serving us prior to this, and rather than rush to get back to those ways, imagine ways where our structures and our systems and our institutions can serve us more. And we're so fortunate to be in a country like New Zealand, where we have, I think, a very real opportunity to do that in a meaningful way.
So much gold there, Kaila. Thank you so much. I am a water baby, and so I completely understand the analogy of ducking under and waiting for the wave to go. I, in these last few weeks, have been thinking a lot about this time as the ocean. So it's funny that you should bring that up, because I think of, the tumultuous waters on the top and having, as you say, to ride the wave, and it's constantly going to be changing and it's going to have a forever ripple effect. But what I've been doing is diving under, not to escape what's going on, but actually to find the stillness that is underneath, and to find the stillness that is within me, and reconnect with my values, reconnect with what's important to me. And I've done exactly what you've said, which is really envisioned the future that I want for myself and for my family and for my team and my clients. And again, that ripple effect outward, because if we can get really clear on that, then we can send those ripple effects out. So there's a lot of great advice in there, and some new ways of thinking for me to take away as well. Thank you so much for everything that you've offered today, and everything that you continue to offer out in the world. I think purpose is so key, and I love the way that you've really kind of taken that down a level, and it's not just about events. It's almost like what people say, I think it goes, think not about what you are selling, but about what people are buying. So we're not necessarily talking about selling and buying here, but really think about your purpose and our purpose as the experience that we are giving and how we are serving people out there and connecting with people out there, which is what we've just done here. And again, I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Have a really wonderful day and enjoy not going back into the rush, as you say, but moving forward into the possibilities.